So hello everyone, welcome to our inaugural workshop between LASA Puerto Rico and the Puerto Rican Studies Association. My name is Jorell Meléndez-Badillo. I'm currently the chair of LASA Puerto Rico, and I'm going to be co-moderating with Yomaira Figueroa-Vásquez.
I was happy to stay muted, but yes, hi everyone, welcome. We're so thankful to have you all here. And we're also really thankful to have our panelists from the presses with us today to share some information on how to get your Boricua book published. But it'll also be an expansive conversation. So not just about Boricua books and Puerto Rican studies books, but I think information that will be useful for everyone, but there will be an emphasis on Puerto Rican studies. So, and I am part of the Puerto Rican Studies Association, a member at large of the new board.
Great, so before we go ahead and introduce our panelists, I wanted to give the floor to Joaquin Villanueva to talk to us a little bit about the Puerto Rican Studies Association.
Hi everyone, and welcome. I'm very excited to be here in collaboration with LASA Puerto Rico. And so I'm the current president of the Puerto Rican Studies Association. And if you're not aware, we are an organization that looks to really bring together Puerto Rican scholars and scholars interested in Puerto Rico to share knowledge and share spaces where we can sort of discuss new ideas and move the field forward, broadly understood, of course. And so we're excited. We're entering a new chapter in the organization. And in particular, this year, we have many events programmed. We have a website where you can find us and become a member if you're not. You can find us at ricanstudies.com. And so this is the first collaboration that we have with LASA Puerto Rico. We're planning other workshops along these similar lines. I just want to give a final shout out to another event that we have on March 25th. We're collaborating with ASWAD. We have an event on Thursday, 25th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time called Black Diasporic Saberes, Reorienting Puerto Rican Studies. And we have a panel full of really awesome Afro-Latina, Afro-Puerto Rican scholars who are going to really move the field forward. So we're very excited about that. So we're excited for today's panel. So I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Joaquin. And so now we're going to give the floor to Jacqueline Villarrubia to tell us a little bit about LASA Puerto Rico.
Saludos a todos y bienvenidos a este evento. As Jorell mentioned, I'm Jacqueline Villarrubia Mendoza from Colgate University. I'm also the incoming chair of the LASA Puerto Rico section. And here at the LASA Puerto Rico section, our objective really is to try to foster dialogues and collaborations that relate not only to Puerto Rico, but to Puerto Rican studies, broadly speaking. Our objective is also to promote both inter and transdisciplinary exchanges and collaborations. We are very keen on trying to create a structure that can encourage, that can promote research, teaching, activism, and also artistic approaches to Puerto Rico and better understanding Puerto Rico and its diaspora. We are very excited for this event, and we hope that this is the first of many collaborations between the LASA Puerto Rico section and Puerto Rican Studies Association. If you're not currently members of the LASA Puerto Rico section, we encourage you to please do so. So join the LASA organization. And then when you're choosing different sections, please make sure to choose the LASA Puerto Rico section. So thank you all for being here, and we're really excited for this event.
Gracias, Jacqueline. Ahora pasamos a presentar a nuestros panelistas. We're super excited to have this group of panelists with us, and we are thankful for them for sharing their time and all their knowledge. And so I'll start with Gisela Fosado, who is and I apologize for my dog. This is the realities of Zoom. Gisela Fosado is the editorial director at Duke University Press and publishes books in a wide range of areas in the humanities and social sciences, including anthropology, sociology, American and Atlantic world history, gender and sexuality studies, race and ethnicity, African American and Africana studies, environmental studies, and Latin America and Latinx studies. Gisela holds an AB from Princeton University and a PhD in cultural anthropology and a certificate in women's studies from the University of Michigan. I have to say that she's also a joy and a pleasure to work with. She's my editor, and it has been nothing short of amazing to work with Gisela. Next, we have Dawn Durante, who is the editor-in-chief at the University of Texas Press. There, she leads the editorial direction of the books program at UT Press, enriching and expanding a list of approximately 100 new titles each year across a broad range of subjects, including US history and American studies, women's studies, and Black studies. Dawn got her BA in English from the University of Arizona and her MA in English from Arizona State. At ASU, she wrote her master's thesis on ebooks and peer review, and also earned a scholarly publishing graduate certificate. Next, we have Beatriz Llenín Figueroa, whose research and creative work revolve around Caribbean literatures and philosophies, island and archipelagic studies, gender and queer theory, decoloniality and street theater and performance. She holds a PhD from Duke University's program in literature and is currently an acting professor of comparative literature and humanities at the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez. She's an associate editor for the independent publishing house, Editora, Educación, Emergente, and is a freelance editor and translator. So once again, thank you so much for being with us today. So next, I'll give the floor to Yomaira. And
the mouse didn't want to work. This is the Zoom world that I'm living in right now. And I'm happy to share the chaos with all of you. We have the captions running right now and they're running across the screen. They're a little wild. I don't know if we want to keep them or not. So please let me know if we should keep them up or not. They're kind of running into folks' screen and they're also a little bit wrong. So just send me a note, team, if you want me to keep them up. So I am so happy to have all three of you here to have the different perspectives from three different kinds of presses and bringing the work forward. So I wanted to know if we can start, I think in the order that Jorell introduced you. I think it would be really great to talk a little bit about the kinds of acquisitions, the kind of aims that your press might have, and any kind of advice that you'd like to give to scholars, particularly first generation scholars and junior scholars about getting their books published.
Yeah, so I'll start. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm just so pleased to be here. Oftentimes, I think people think that a lot of publishing is in a complete black box behind a black curtain. No one knows what really happens, how it all happens, and it just magically happens for some people. And a lot of this knowledge kind of gets transferred through mentorship networks, but that's not intentional. We as publishers want to really be visible and have our processes be as transparent as possible. And I think there's been a lot of efforts on our part to try to do that. And so anyway, I'm so thankful for this invitation because it is important work for us to do. And part of the reason why it's so important is because we can't do what we do without you. And so we're part of this symbiotic system, and we need to be connecting and sharing information about how our processes are changing, how your writing is, how the whole ecosystem is changing. So I'm just really happy to be here. And I guess one thing I'll say about, so there's probably a really wide range of knowledge about publishing out there amongst you. So a lot of it, what I say might seem really obvious, but hopefully some of it will be helpful. And I guess one thing I'll say is that the publishing ecosystem is broad. There are so many different kinds of publishers out there. And one of the things that you'll need to think about, and maybe you already have, is, the purpose of your book is most likely to get tenure. And so, thinking about what are the publishers, are there publishers that your tenure committee, that your university is going to look at more favorably than others? And from what I think a lot of people here have more knowledge about that than I do, but there really are, many departments have these tiers of presses. Not all presses are seen the same for tenure. There are, the way that commercial presses are seen in some fields is very different. There are also predatory presses in commercial publishing that you need to be aware of, and also trade presses. A lot of departments will look at trade presses that don't include a rigorous review process very differently. So, you really want to have a clear sense of which press is going to meet that need of getting you tenure and having you seen as having gone through the peer review process at a place that is reputable within your field. And that really varies. And that's part of what many of you probably already know, but every press specializes in different areas. We have acquisition editors that have specializations. Some presses like Duke Press and many other presses are very interdisciplinary. So some of the editors are going to overlap, but in general, there are clear emphases for each press. We go to certain meetings and not others. We advertise in certain journals and not other. There's just certain ways that we have developed these lists in very specialized ways. And you don't want to be at a press that's not specializing in the area that you're writing in, because we're not going to be as good at reaching that readership, of even having the robust network of peer reviewers. And our advisory boards tend to reflect the specialty of our press. So there's all these ways in which we have systems that have really specialized presses. And I think the other important thing is every editor is different. You want to find an editor that you can connect with. There's going to be this very intimate process that you're going to go through with your editor. They're going to be sharing some very lengthy and sometimes difficult reader reports that you have to wade through, and you need someone who you really trust and can connect with to make it really through that process, because it can be extremely stressful. And every a lot of people, this is part of your homework, as talking to your mentors, talking to anyone who you know who's published with a press that you're considering. Ask them about their relationship with their editor, ask them about what the process was like. And also, in thinking about the different kinds of presses out there, we also, different presses also have a different, some presses only publish hardcover initially, then they go to paperback, some publish. So there's just all kinds of differences, and you want to do your homework before you identify the kind of press that might be a good fit. So that's all I'll say as an opening. And yeah, I'll turn it over to the next person.
Yeah, I think I'm up next. John Durante here. I also want to say thank you for having me. I find that, in this time of isolation, I'm very hungry for all these opportunities to have a sense of connection. I know that we're, not headed towards a normal return, but I really enjoyed doing these things before, and I really enjoy doing them still. So it's a real pleasure to be representing Texas and the extensive publishing program there, which has had a long-term commitment to Latin American, and Latinx studies. I think I wanted to follow up a little bit more talking about maybe editorial roles. I love being an editor. I didn't ever dream I'd ever find a job that was so fulfilling. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about what I see as the role of an editor, and as you're thinking through presses and what is about editors as well. for me personally, one of my roles that I take very seriously is being a white feminist anti-racist ally. And I feel one of the reasons I find my job very fulfilling is that the very books I acquire teach me ways to be better at that. And one of the passions I have is to help people get their books in the hands of people who can also learn from those. And I think that when we're talking about Puerto Rico and the topics we're talking about here today, there's such an important way to help us understand national complexities, colonialism, these sorts of things. So that's a more personal side. One other thing I think is a really important role for an editor that you'd want to look at, ask your mentors about, like it's been said, is you want an advocate. This publishing process is something you need, like will want to feel like you have a resource for. And also once the book is out in the world, like I know many of the editors are like me who, if we're at a conference in the before times, we will put your book in the hands of people at a conference when they're like, I'm interested in this, I will hand it, so advocating in myriad sorts of ways. And this came up a little bit at the beginning. Jacqueline mentioned this word, collaboration. I feel like first and foremost, I'm a collaborator with the authors and editors I work with. And in fact, I see publishing as a series of collaborations, from the work you do maybe with your interviewees or archivists, to engaging with your fellow scholars through maybe panels or through the actual like textual engagement that you do in your manuscripts, editors, peer reviewers, production, and the list goes on. And the reason I think approaching this process as a collaboration, I think it creates certain opportunities, because I'm just as open to learning from you as I hope that you are from learning from me. I will learn from you in terms of your expertise, the book you're writing about, the person you are. And I have been hopefully spending these last decade or so learning about publishing so I can impart that knowledge, demystify it, take down that black curtain box. But what it also means is that when you approach things as a collaboration, the way there are things to give and take as in any collaborative effort, we can make sure we remember that there's not one right way for the publishing process to go, which is really good. I know that sometimes people really want specific answers, like when should I send in my proposal? But when we remember that there's not one right way for all this to go, I think it is really productive, because we all know what happens when systems become entrenched, because that creates hurdles and marginalizations and inequities. So above all else, I'm really grateful to be part of this collaboration today. And I hope we can, dig into some heavy, helpful questions as we go on today.
Hola, hola a todos. Hi everyone, I'm Beatriz. Well, first of all, I'd like to see everyone's dogs at some point. Please never excuse yourselves for dogs or any kind of animals, non-human animals. I'm also very thankful, gracias, very, very thankful for the invitation, and everyone at Editora Educación Emergente, which is 3 people. We're also all very thankful for the invitation and grateful to be here. So thank you to the PRSA and the Puerto Rico LASA chapter, and to everyone involved in organizing this event. I guess what I want to use these first few minutes for, I'd like to say a little bit about Editora Educación Emergente, and for short, I'll just say EEE, because it's a there's some very big differences between what the way we conceive of the project, where we're at, and how it functions with respect to my colleagues at university presses in the US. So the first thing I think it's important to keep in mind, well, I'm actually talking to you from Cabo Rojo, Puerto Rico, and this is actually the first sort of piece of information that I think is really important, because this is a project that is based, it was dreamt and founded outside the metropolitan area of Puerto Rico, which is, you know, the first sort of impulse that's important for me to stress. It's a project that seeks to be part of, you know, a lot of efforts that are going on in the archipelago for several years now, but, you know, they've been intensifying recently to decentralize cultural work and production and circulation of art and books and culture in general. So that's the first thing. I think it's very important. We founded Tripoli in 2009, so we've been around for barely over a decade now. But that, as people familiar with the situation in the archipelago, is in itself a kind of like immense effort. You know, as many of you know, cultural organizations in general in Puerto Rico, because of, you know, the multiple reasons, face some tough challenges to continue to have like persistence over time. So being a little bit over a decade is something that we feel, you know, that can be celebrated. But we're a very small scale independent press. We do work with every project as attentively as possible, and every project is a peer-reviewed project, even because we do publish creative writing as well, in addition to critical creative writing or academic writing. So everything goes through a peer review process, but all of this is voluntary work. You know, the team, sort of a sort of voluntary team we've been able to put together over the past 10 years of people who do peer reviews for our projects. They all do the work voluntarily, and you know, most of the editing and the rest of the production process of each project is voluntary work, or we have some, you know, several kinds of exchange or economía del regalo, a lot of gifts, a lot of just people offering their time. And so we've developed 9 series so far, and additionally a 10th one, which is the Libros Libres. That's the free open access series that we have. And across those 9 series, we publish primarily in 3 big areas: creative writing, and in general creative projects, because there's, you know, some of that too. What you would call academic writing, or critical, I'd like to call it critical creative writing. And also we have books that are specifically with a pedagogical or educational thrust, right? And that seek to be manuals or tools that can be used in schools or in educational scenarios that are not necessarily institutional. When we started, like I said, around 2008, 2009, we imagined, you know, if I were to focus on the more academic aspect of the project, of publishing in the project, because I know that's the main public in this event, we imagined Tripoli as a kind of sister project of what were already some very important established presses in the archipelago. And I'd like to stress and to highlight the work of the Editorial of the University of Puerto Rico, the Editorial UPR, the press of the Instituto de Cultura Puertorriqueña, and Callejón, which I'm sure people here are familiar with. Those were the 3 sort of main presses publishing academic work, if I'm focusing on that, right? Over the last few years, these presses, and especially the UPR press, have faced some pretty significant cuts and challenges associated with, well, you know what? If I were to go through that, then my time would be over. But, you know, austerity and neoliberalism and the junta and all of this and the crisis and debt and etc. And so one of the things that has happened as a result of that is that Tripoli has actually been receiving a lot more projects, because the kind of amazing thing that has happened is the crisis, and I use that word advisedly, I know it's, but all of that we put under the name crisis is going in one direction, and actually the effervescence, the creative thrust, the impulse to keep producing thought and art and all kinds of cultural productions is running kind of in the other direction. I mean, we actually feel and we see that with sister presses that publish creative writing, especially, that there's a lot of things going on with artists and writers and thinkers in Puerto Rico, or who want to say something about the context of Puerto Rico in general, broadly speaking. That's actually, it's a lot that's going on, and it's amazing. So what has happened is that we are actually receiving a lot more proposals and projects than we did, I don't know, 5 years ago. So right now, because we're so small and we do a very, cuidado, attentive process with each proponent and with each project, is that we have gone from dealing with roughly 3 projects per year to dealing now with 8 or 9 projects per year. And I mean, contrast that with like 100 titles a year that my colleagues in university presses can produce. Well, we're really small. That has meant too that the timeline to see each project through has, pretty much triplicated. So we're defending the slow time of geology, let us say, or something like that. So, it takes a little while, but we try to make sure that the wait is worthwhile for the projects that actually can wait and can go through the entire process and we see them through. There are other things I can say, but I don't know, maybe I'm taking too much time, so I'm just going to stop here and just answer questions from people. I'm not being I haven't spoken in English for a long time now, so I don't know if I'm doing so.
No, great. Thank you so much. We have some questions in the chat, but before we get to those questions, I think there's some important things that you can help us and can probably help orient some of the folks who are here participating in the talk. So there's 2 questions, and you could give us brief answers. Could you share any examples of things that could be detrimental to a person's chances of publishing with your press? And also, what are some of the things that you wish first-time authors knew that could make the publishing process go a bit smoother? And you can, however y'all want to answer that, in whatever order you feel.
I can go first if you would like. I'll take the first question about what are some instrumental things about that you can do to have a good chance of getting published. And this kind of gets to one of the points that Don raised about when's the right time to approach a publisher. And for me, the right time is when you have your story or your argument. A lot of times when we write dissertations, we're kind of, you have to start producing those chapters and you're not really sure what the big picture is, but you're cranking out the chapters because you want to get the PhD, or at least that was my experience. And then it usually takes a while after you finish your PhD before you really know what the main story is of your work, or what you're trying to do with the project. What intellectual work is it trying to do? And so for me, I think if you wait until you have that, some people send in proposals and you can just tell they're not quite that, they're not fully cooked in terms of making an argument or telling a story. And it seems like an interesting topic, but it's hard to say how it's going to develop. So for me, it's just making sure you have that, which does take time. And it takes a lot of just spitballing, having conversations with mentors and colleagues and trying to figure out what is that thing that makes my work so exciting? What is the passion? What is the story I'm really trying to tell that's so interesting and different? And then once you have that, write a very clear, down to earth, we're not specialists, but tell us what the story is, what your argument is, and make sure that the press publishes in that area. I get a lot of proposals for projects where we just don't publish in a particular area. So as long as you have that story and you make it really clear and you're approaching the right press, I think you have a really good chance of getting published.
I was thinking a little bit about that question about, what could be detrimental. And I think when I think back to things that probably shifted my collaborations to unproductive directions was really dishonesty. I mean, as something like as basic as what you'd want from your colleagues already. And, it's not as if you have to tell your entire life story to an editor, but, many presses, for example, ask for exclusive peer review. And if you've said that you will be entering peer review with one press, and then later the editor is querying reviewers and a reviewer is like, oh, I'm reviewing this for another press right now. These things make having the candid conversations about the process a little harder. So, I mean, that is a very that's one that I would just say that I've seen make a rocky road to publication. But I think something that also I've seen authors struggle with the process when they've not been open to peer review as a collaborative process. So for example, when I get peer reviews and share them with authors, I try to make it clear that we don't have to take up all the recommendations reviewers have said. This is not some sort of checklist, but we do want to be open and engaging those thoughts. And I've had people say, well, I wrote my dissertation as a book, so I don't really know why I have to revise. Or some people who are on their second or third book and get reviews back and are immediately defensive and being like, I don't agree with this. And it's like, well, it's okay that if you don't agree, but if we can't articulate really strong reasons why you disagree, then that kind of forecloses opportunities for us to move forward. So those were two things that might be considered detrimental. And what I wish first-time authors knew, or any author for that matter, is something that I think some people know and they have learned in their work with editors, but maybe doesn't always get said out right, is that editors may not, editors are part of the ecosystem that you are in. We want to support tenure. We want to support promotion. We're really invested in the disciplines and building these discussions and narratives and things like that. So I did have someone once ask me, it's like, well, what's taking you so long with my manuscript? Don't you just query reviewers? I'm like, well, that's one thing, but I'm reading your manuscript and I'm trying and I'm engaging it. And I have, I'm coming to this as someone who wants to set you up for success at something like peer review, or when you're sharing a proposal, the manuscript is maybe like a year out, like asking questions to try and see make that process a little easier. So I do hope that in all of our introductions, I think we like hit upon the idea of approachability, of collaboration, things like this. So I hope people know that we're not, it's not like we're just editors hoping to publish a book. We are acquiring like broadly and thinking through how we can support fields as well beyond singular titles. And I think that us being part of these panels speaks that, right? We're not going to necessarily acquire books here, or maybe a couple, but whatever. We're not imagining that this results in a book being published by our presses, that we're doing this because we want to demystify publishing and we want to help build, enrich disciplinary texts and whatnot. All right, enough from me.
I just wanted to say that I subscribe or echo what my colleagues just said. For I guess to sort of add to the idea that finding the right press, or thinking about what press might be a fit for your project. I think that's you know, if you want to publish a project for a tenure process in a university in the United States, then I'd say make sure something like Tripoli would be a press that your university would consider a worthy or press to you know, because the truth is we're not a university press, we're not a commercial press. We have a very limited reach in terms of distribution, precisely because of our scale, and because of the type of work we do. And so if the tenure process in the university already requires a certain profile from the press and a certain capacity for production and distribution internationally, for instance, then we might not be the best fit for you. That also applies to the timeline, like I was saying. If there's a strong reason why the project needs, you know, should be out or needs to be out within a couple years or something like that, then maybe we might not be a good fit, because we can't actually, for us, it's more important to assure the quality of the book that is published in the end than it is anything else. And the quality even means the object. We're very invested in trying to produce beautiful objects when they're not the libros libres, when it's a, you know, we work case by case with each author to decide what kind of production we're going to make and all of that. So if we're going to actually print the book, we go through a design process that is as rigorous as we can make it with our limited resources. But, you know, we want to make sure that the book is not only a good book in its contents, but it's actually a beautiful book too. And those kinds of things, and also the peer review process, like I said, it's a completely voluntary work. So if I'm asking someone to just gift me their time to evaluate this manuscript, you know, sometimes that takes longer than one wishes it would. But, you know, sometimes people need, you know, one more month than they said originally they would turn back in the review. And then it goes back to the authors for revision. And in that sense too, I also want to say, like my colleague said, some of the experience that have been more difficult are those that have to do with people who have not been particularly open to the timeline or the peer review process. But that's, you know, it's clear that that's part of the rigor that we want to ensure for our books. So and then also, you know, sometimes the other thing that can be sort of a bad fit is also receiving projects that just don't respond to the sort of profile that we have, which is, you know, you can easily find it in the internet, but you can also ask us, of course, the types of books we actually publish and the contents of our series. Sometimes that's just the problem. It's like we can't consider this manuscript simply because it does not correspond to what we're actually publishing. So that, but in general, I feel like we, you know, the vast majority of the projects we've published so far, we have a little bit over 50 titles now. The vast majority have gone there, you know, it's been great. It's been easy. People have been really open and generous and patient. So, you know, I think that in general, if you keep these things in mind, it shouldn't be a tortuous process at all. We try to make sure it isn't.
Thank you for those answers. Thank you to everyone. So we have multiple questions in the Q&A, and so we're merging some of the questions. So for example, we have a couple of questions in regards to that stage where people should send the manuscript. So I'm gonna read two questions from Julie Torres and Guillermina de Ferrari. Julie asked, before sending out book proposals to presses, do you recommend first having a couple of chapters fully revised, drafted, particularly for those of us working on transforming our dissertations into a book? She also asked, given that COVID has affected our ability to meet at conferences, do you recommend reaching out to acquisitions editors before even sending the proposal to gauge interest? And Guillermina asked, at what stage in our manuscript should we contact the press? So I think those are related.
Does someone else want to go first this time? I'm happy to if you don't, but please.
I won't speak to all of that. I would like to create space, but I do want to say COVID or not COVID, conferences or not conferences, you should never hesitate to reach out to an editor with questions, because even in conference time, we all know that resources are limited. You may not get funding to go. So it's always wonderful when we connect in person at conferences when that's possible, but it's literally our jobs to field emails, take phone calls, to answer questions. So I never mind when someone like reaches out. You know, I also always say the more material I have, the better. You know, if someone sends me an email with an abstract of their project, 9 times out of 10, I'm just like, yeah, please send me more, because I need all the data to make an informed, educated decision about if the press is a right fit for the project. So I think that speaks a little bit to, do you recommend having chapters and whatnot? And you know, Gisela was saying, when you have your story is a really good time to send in your of your manuscript. Like, I think about it similarly as when you've conceptualized the project. So there's not like a timeline of 6 months before the manuscript is complete, 1 year before the manuscript is complete, because you might, you know, have caretaking duties or a 4-4 teaching load. You might have the exact manuscript in mind and just not be able to like implement it. So the right time to share it with an editor, in my opinion, is when you're able to articulate it all in your proposal, even if it feels like it could be far away. We're very patient, and you know, most of the time people are later than what they say they're going to turn in anyway, so it's no worries.
I can piggyback a little bit on that. Yeah, just thinking about this timeline, you know, it's going to be, it might sound scary, but it's probably going to be like 4 years, maybe 5 before the actual book is, like, this whole process takes such a long time. And sometimes I do get proposals and people say, oh, in 4 years I'll have something, you know, maybe that's maybe a little too early, but maybe it's not. You know, there are times where I'm so excited about a topic or an approach that I'm just like, great, let's check in regularly and see how it's going. But in general, I think a lot of presses will want a couple sample chapters. They might not require it, but you know, I think checking out, because we have to meet you. We want to meet you. This is how we do our job. But different editors do have different preferences on how they want to be contacted. And all of that, we make that information really easily available. Presses, if you look at their websites, they'll tell you, okay, this is how, you know, we'd like you to send in a hard copy of whatever, which usually doesn't happen these days, or, you know, we want you to send this and this and this. Some people have forms, and yes, we go to academic conferences to see people, and I can tell you that our team of editors has really felt disconnected the last year. Some particular editors just feel like they're not meeting young scholars, and it's been a source of frustration. So yes, like, please connect with us. We've tried to do like open office hours during conferences, but a lot of people aren't seeing that, you know, on social media we're advertising that. So yes, I mean, it's better to err on contacting us too much, because we want to meet you. We want to hear about your projects. I just want to say that there are some conferences where I think editors get overloaded. You know, we have a huge list in Latin American studies at Duke, same with anthropology. So there's some conferences where I am booked solid every single half hour. And so if an editor just can't meet with you, it really, definitely don't take it personally. Please send your proposal. We want to connect with as many people as possible.
Thank you all for that. I guess following up within this realm of questions, we have one anonymous question and one question asked by Marisol Lebron. Hi, everyone. I think one of the things that is sometimes really confusing for first-time authors is navigating different kinds of contracts and when to submit their materials. So can folks explain the difference between an advanced contract versus submitting a full manuscript, and maybe an advanced versus a final contract? I wanted to ask that. And also thanks for being here. And then also the anonymous question is, can you share thoughts about seeking to be part of a series? Thoughts to keep in mind or things that might not be helpful with regards to submitting your materials to a series?
I'm just going to say something very quickly about the question of the process with the contracts and all of that. I am going to defer to my colleagues. Ours is most probably a much sort of simpler process, precisely because of our scale. In general, we've worked with, full manuscripts that people that we've asked people to submit, and we have guidelines for you to prepare your manuscript to submit it. And right now, because of the situation that I described at the beginning, we're working with, as of today, for instance, we have already our calendar booked for this year, next year, and almost booked for 2023 for the process to start. So if you in general, it's best for us if you are able to submit your manuscript when you're ready to submit the manuscript as you feel comfortable with it at that point. But, if you want to wait, like I said, for the process to start, then when the time comes for your turn, so to speak, we'll make sure to ask you beforehand if you have revisions, because time will have elapsed. If you have revisions on your manuscript before actually starting the peer review process. The contract with us, it's something that happens once the book has passed through those steps and is accepted for publication. Then we generally have a very simple meeting where we discuss the details of the production process, and then we establish an acuerdo. We call it an acuerdo, like an agreement, and then the process goes on. So we don't have that two steps for contracts and all of that. And then the other question was about series, and I don't know if that question is for everyone or if it's about the Triple-E series that I talked about. If that's the case, then I would say just if you go to our webpage, you can see there's descriptions of what each series publishes, the types of content and materials each series is interested in. Some of them have to do with creative writing in different sort of forms or genres. Others have to do with, like I said, pedagogical books, and others with the types of books probably most people in this event would be writing or interested in writing. That, for instance, Otra Universidad, Otra Crítica are two of the series that of Triple-E series that publish more academic content. So if you just review the characteristics of each series, you can think of. But in general, when people submit their project, if it's a project that actually fits with the general profile of Editora Educación Emergente, which is, books that are emergent in content, form, or methodology, and that commercial presses would not necessarily be interested in Puerto Rico. That's kind of the general sort of idea of our project. People just submit. We don't require you to submit a manuscript already thinking or saying, I want this manuscript for X series that you have. We actually work with you in addressing which series fits best for the project if it is accepted. So that's how we've worked with that until now.
I can jump in with about these questions. I think you're going to find there's so many different ways to do things with every press. So for Duke, we don't have advanced contracts. We only have one kind of contract, and it is a final binding contract. We're bound to publish your book, and you're bound to publish with us. And that's certainly not the case with a lot of presses. Some presses have these advanced contracts, and sometimes it's a good idea if there are, if you can get an advanced contract with a really prominent press in your field, and you're on the job market and you have an advanced contract from one of the top presses in your field, that's probably going to help you. There are things that we do that we try to think are somewhat equivalent. We can write letters of interest. We can write letters that commit to sending your project out for review. So there are things that we try to do that are similar, but these advanced contracts can be tricky too. Some presses try to lock authors in early, and so you want to just make sure it's the right press. It's the press that you want, because then you really can't go to another press. But it's not necessarily binding on them to publish you. So it can be tricky. You want to definitely get some guidance from your mentors on those. And for us, we issue our contracts after peer review. So for first books, we send the entire manuscript out for peer review. And if the 2 reports are positive, even if they say, there's a lot of work, but this is going to be amazing, that's still positive report, and we can issue a contract with 2 positive reports. And I'll just say quickly about series. Series work in so many different ways, even within the same press. We have some series are really trying to build something new. They're bringing a conversation that's new and emergent, and they're trying to bring it all together. Some series are really broad. We had this Latin America Otherwise series for many years that was very active. And then it sort of became our whole list. Like we were just doing really edgy work in Latin American studies. And now it's kind of died off, but so you want to, and sometimes I get proposals for people who want to publish a series that has not been active for 20 years because we've abandoned that. So, you want to just kind of be looking to see what the series is doing now. And sometimes it's a good thing. Series editors will take an active approach and be part of your team of helping you really make the best book possible. A lot of series editors are not super active with their projects, and more just kind of green light projects to be in their series. So it can really work in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, echoing that, each series kind of has a different kind of feel and whatnot. I will say that when you're thinking about a press to publish with, if you think that their general list is really strong and a really strong series, then it probably wouldn't be a big issue to submit. And then if it weren't quite right for the series, continue that publishing process outside of a series. It's not really a consequence to not be in a series. Sometimes it's an added benefit if you feel like that is just a series is really in line with your work. But I did want to talk a little bit more about contracts. I just want to be clear that I don't know of a single university press, and I've looked and I've consulted with someone who is writing a book about this, that offers distinct legal documents. And I encourage people to think about the advance or not advance part of the contract as it's not describing the contract or the document. It is describing the part of the process you are getting the contract at. So sometimes when we hear the term advance contract, it is usually meaning you are getting a contract in advance of further peer review. So whether a proposal is going out for a peer review or a full manuscript, if you get 2 supportive reports, if a press is offering you an advance contract, you want to enter into that legally binding agreement with the press. It means that you're signing a contract with the realization that there will be further peer review, and it's contingent upon further review and approval by a faculty board. There are pros and cons to that, of course. One con we've already mentioned is that it does like align you with the press, like you are committed to that. And one of the pros is that when you go, if you go on a market and you're like, I am under advanced contract. So, you know, that's also something to talk to your editor about, because I've been in a position to offer advanced contracts to many authors, but had candid conversations about, well, how does this help you? How does this not help you? Like, do you need it? And those are the kinds of things where open dialogue with editors can, that's just one more thing that we're like a resource and we're an ally. And because again, we're not in it for like a book to editor relationship, we're in it to like help the field overall. It's, you know, if you think it's best for you to not get a contract yet, that works too. But different presses do have different philosophies about, you know, sending out proposals for revised dissertation or not, or whatever. Some don't offer advanced contracts at all for revised dissertation. So those are things to talk about as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for those answers. So we have a couple of questions about writing styles and also about the topics that each publishing house publishes. And so we'll merge a couple of questions. So Ian Rolón asked that, hi, as someone who is more into writing fiction than nonfiction and wants to write stories about people who look and speak as I do, is there still, or have you noticed in your experience, the same kind of resistance from publishers, editors about authors using Spanish or Spanglish in novels that might be written for a predominantly English audience? Kerian Sotovega, as I love the creative, critical approach, I wonder how that style is perceived in the different presses. My writing tends to fluctuate a strictly academic approach with some creative flair, but I'm not sure about how that would be viewed in the official process of sending a manuscript for consideration. Is that something that should be held up more towards the end or from the get-go, from the proposal sample chapters? And lastly, Edwin Jusino has a book project that touches on sports and cultural identity. And so he's wondering, as he's finishing his dissertation, which press would be best for him.
I do sports, so I'll talk a little bit about that. I acquire sports at Texas. I think that presses you might want to look at, you can hit me up with a proposal if you want. Other great sports lists, Kansas, Illinois, Arkansas has a great list. Depending on where exactly you see it situated, you could look to places like certain sports. I feel like Colorado has done a lot on baseball. A great way to decide what presses you might want to look at is to look at your bibliography and look at your bookshelves and see who you're citing, who you're engaging with, and look at those presses websites and see if you see a fit. I also wanted to answer the question, or at least give my insight on my perspective on the question about if you have some experimental elements or creative writing in your project. I think I absolutely say transparency at every stage. So if you're holding something back to the end, the whole point of sharing a proposal is so an editor gets a feel of the project, starts to learn about it, so you can have discussions about being on the same page about audience, about, you know, production, if there's like a lot of art, these kinds of things. So being very clear about what the project is up front is not only going to save you a lot of headaches, but make sure that the editor's on board, gets it, that the press can like support that kind of thing. So I would say up front for sure.
For sure, yes. For a press called Educación Emergente, Editora Educación Emergente, we would very much prefer to receive proposals that, although they're imagined within a sort of academic universe, there is an effort to, I mean, I think the most difficult experiences we've had with specifically academic work that's submitted is when it's still a dissertation, but we're not a dissertation committee. That's not what we're doing. So it's actually really, really good that when you submit your manuscript, it has already mutated and transformed, and it's no longer something that you produced because it was a requirement for a degree, and that has its own kind of life, right? And it's its own kind of process. But many times what we've faced in for instance peer review, in our peer review processes, or even after the manuscript has been revised after the peer reviews, when we work as editors with it, is actually, you know, doing the work of further transforming the text for it not to be something like a dissertation anymore. So it's actually for us really, really good and important if you can actually make sure that we don't have to go through that with you, because it you know, it's another layer of work for a press that basically has 2 editors only. We're really small scale, like I said. So if you actually, and also in terms of content and form, we're really interested in the emergent part of our name. So if you really, if you make the effort and are invested in trying to think critically and creatively at the same time, and actually make that part of your proposal and your writing style, and even the way in which you approach whatever it is that you're trying to say, in a non-strictly traditional academic way, that's actually really good for a press like ours. You know, we'd be much more interested in that than in a sort of traditional academic, strictly academic writing, is what I'm trying. I don't know if I'm explaining myself very well, but that's that's what I'm trying to say. So it's actually really good for us.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this is the moment for those of you who just love writing and love experimenting with writing. This is the moment. There's always been people who, you know, writers who push the blending of genres, who are experimenting with writing, but we have never seen anything like this, like what we're seeing now at Duke Press and, you know, in publishing. One of the conversations that our board has been wanting to have recently is, how is this going to work with tenure? Like, how are all of these people who are writing these books that are so experimental, who are really breaking disciplinary boundaries, how are they getting tenure? So because we know we're publishing a lot of books that are theory, but written in poetry, as poems that are, you know, just pushing it, integrating biography and all of their critical thinking. So there's just all kinds of experiments that are going on right now. And so I think, yes, say it right up front. Some presses are going to really welcome that, and also make sure you talk to your tenure committee to make sure that it's going to be, that you are in a department that's going to support that kind of work. But yes, there are definitely publishers like Duke that are finding really incredible work right now. And yeah, keep experimenting, please.
Thank you.
So should I touch on the question about Spanish? Oh, we don't publish fiction, but I do know there's sometimes some of our authors are interested in bilingual editions of their books, and those have been tough for us for a range of reasons. Partly it doubles the size of a book, but I think it is really important to keep talking about how we can expand those ways to reach multiple readerships.
Thank you. We have 2 clusters of questions as we're wrapping up to the end of this event. I'm going to ask one and Jorell's going to ask the other one. This one is going to continue questions around advice on the kinds of intricate parts of the job. So the first one is by Elizabeth Manley. Do you all have any advice about negotiating terms for translation of books after the initial publication, for example, into Spanish? And then this next question is by Francisco Eduardo Robles, which is, some presses are turning to Creative Commons licensing instead of copyright. How do y'all feel about this? Relatedly, can an author pursue Creative Commons if the press typically uses copyright? I've also seen some presses making their books open access from the outset rather than down the line. Is this where you see academic publishing going, or no? And I think maybe one of the things we can add to this is like, what do y'all recommend as editors right now for something like this, if we're being asked about Creative Commons licenses or open access?
I'm gonna answer that last few questions. Actually, one of the ways in which we are, of course, constantly self-critically evaluating the work we do and trying to find ways to face the situation that I described at the beginning and sort of solve some of those challenges. And one of the ways is actually incentivizing the publication of open access books. We have a series devoted to that. And it's actually been surprising to us because at the beginning, when we started EEE, we thought we'd be publishing a lot more of that because we're a nonprofit. We're basically pretty much gifting the work we do to Puerto Rico in general. And I mean, I want to say the world, whatever, but like, to Puerto Rico, especially in the broad sense. So we have actually been surprised with the investment that people that have been involved with EEE and proponents have had with the print book. It's actually been, people want that still a lot more than they do digital books, open access books, digital books. But we're trying to incentivize that because that actually it makes the process quicker. We even right now we're facing a problem with our printing press here in Puerto Rico. We've been committed to printing in Puerto Rico in order to support that, to support the economy, the business here. But the machines, they get broken, and then we have this backlog and we're trying to get books out and we can't get them out on time as we wish or as we had planned. So, and that's one problem. I mean, there are many parts of the process, right, where things can get slowed down if we're working with print books. If we're working with digital books, then the process can be quicker. And with people who actually have an institutional support and can actually bring a project and offer a fee for us to cover the production cost of the open access book, then that's one of the things we're trying to do in order to get more books, worthy books out, and to sustain ourselves, to sustain the project. But I think that's, I wanted to say something else, but I forgot. Maybe I'll remember. I'm going to mute myself so I don't take up time. But if I remember, then I'll say it later.
We've published over 100 open access books in the last 7 or 8 years since we started publishing open access books. And we've been really pleased with the experiments. There have been different experiments that fund these open access books. In general, right now, the one that funds the most is called Toward an Open Monograph Ecosystem, TOME. But there are only about a dozen or so presses participating in that program. So I know that, if somebody is at one of these institutions, UCLA, University of Michigan, NYU, there's all kinds, then I know that, I can talk to this author and say, hey, your university is part of TOME. TOME would pay us $15,000 to make your book open access. And is that something, and what I've seen is a lot of authors just love this idea. They love it because it makes their work accessible worldwide for free. And it really works for us because we estimate that we invest about $30,000 to $40,000 in producing each book. So, by getting $15,000 and having it available for free, that almost covers half of our expenses. And so we don't have to sell as many to kind of break even. And just so it's clear, like we almost never break even. We lose money on most of our books, but it's enough of it's enough support to be able to open it up and still recover some money. We still print the books, we still sell them, and some people just don't want to read books online. You know, they really want the physical object, and we produce really beautiful books, so people really want that. But we love experimenting, and we love the idea of the global reach that this provides for our books.
Yeah, the open access is just such a big question. I'm actually missing a UT open access subcommittee meeting right now. No, I'd rather be here. But it's like really something that, like, as an institution that I'm newly at, we're thinking about, and the press, which is in a time of transition, about thinking about digital strategies and OBA being a subset of that. And the big hurdle is that financing. I also thought that the negotiation of terms for translations was an interesting question. If I heard that right, it was a recommendation for negotiating maybe for those rights. One thing I'll say is that a lot of the rights publishers get in the contract help them help you, right? We have rights and permissions, staff on hand, and things like that. What I'll also say about translations is that it takes two, right? It takes you wanting it to be translated and a publisher who can translate it. And so we often have rights staff members, presses across UP, across the university presses, who are going to book fairs, trying to find presses who want to translate those. So one model that, you might consider if you really want it translated, but then at a certain point your press is to do something in a contract where it's like the press retains translation rights for, like, Spanish language rights for 24 months or something. At that point, if you feel like the press hasn't, I don't know, this is something I've seen at both the presses I've been had, but in that case, it gives the press a real good chance to get like a conversation started, use the resources they have. But then if you are feeling like you have other inroads, to take those with you. But I also think that a lot of the successful translations I've seen are when authors are like helping presses find those things on both ends of the production, both the original publisher and the translation publisher. But if I misunderstood that question, I'm sure we can all speak to it differently. So I hope I understood it.
Great. Oh, sorry,
no,
Gisela.
Jorell, did you want to talk about what I was just going to say is that we give our authors the option of keeping Spanish or Portuguese rights. So we don't want to to be in the way of an author being able to publish their book in Latin America. And sometimes being able to publish a book in a small press in Guatemala, or it means that the author is going to have to pay for the translation, and they're going to also have to provide a subvention to the press. So it doesn't make sense for us to be in the middle of that. But it's definitely a conversation, and sometimes authors are happy to leave the rights to us and have us negotiate things, and sometimes they feel strongly, no, I know the exact press that I want to publish my book, and it's no problem to leave those rights to the author.
Great, thank you all for those answers. So as we wrap up, we have a couple of questions that are targeted, and we apologize for those questions that we did not get to cover today. But we have questions that are targeted for particular editors. So Beatriz, you mentioned the importance of thinking about location, hosting an editorial project in Cabo Rojo outside of El Área Metro. How this intentionality figure in terms of the peer review and editing process? And that was asked by Monica Ocasio. Don and Gisela, Aurora Santiago asks, how do you see Puerto Rican studies books about Puerto Rico more generally fitting into the press catalog? And last question, anonymously asked for Dawn. I've been told that UT Press publishes translated fiction. Perhaps you can confirm if edited / annotated / critical translations from Spanish to English are an interest to UT Press. If so, what elements should the translation include?
are we starting in the same order that the questions were asked? Hola, Mónica. I know Mónica rather well. It's a great question. We over the course of the past decade, we've worked with the networks we have had and have fostered over the past decade with people both in the archipelago and outside the archipelago that might be the best fit for each project. And sometimes also in general for a series. For instance, we have people, you know, a sort of like pretty stable roster of collaborators, people who do peer review for us, who are themselves creative writers. And so that is really helpful when peer reviewing creative projects that we receive. People also associated with the University of Puerto Rico who have expertise on sociology or anthropology or law, etc. We've been able to foster networks and collaborations and friendships too with colleagues and friends who give us their time depending on the areas of the projects that we're working in. So some of these people are in the west coast of Puerto Rico's so-called main island, but other people are not. So in that sense, the location for the peer review process it doesn't really determine the people who help us with that and who work with us with that. So it's more informed by people's capacity to actually do a good job at reviewing your book because of their trajectory, because of the work they do, because of their expertise or their areas of thought and creation. I think, I don't remember, Monica, if there was another element to the question, but I remembered the peer review element. I hope to have answered.
In terms of Aurora's question about the place of Puerto Rican studies within our list, I would say it's a very central place. You know, we would see any book on Puerto Rico as being a central book in our American studies list, our Latin American studies list, our Caribbean studies list, our colonial and post-colonial studies list. You know, we think of our list as very intersectional, and so it would also depend on what it's focusing on. But, you know, we're not a press that focuses on things that have been centered historically. We're trying to center the things that have been marginalized and theories that have been marginalized. So we really feel like we aim to be a decolonial press, and so I think we would be very interested in growing our Puerto Rican studies list.
I went ahead and answered the question about translations typed in chat, sent a link to the series. So the critical edition would probably be outside of that. And so to backtrack to the question about where Puerto Rican studies would fit in our catalog, similarly, I feel like everywhere Puerto Rican studies is gender studies. It could be Black, it can be Latin American. So all the things that have a publishing strength, and of course it has its own consideration, like thoughtfulness in terms of like the peer reviewers you pick. But when we talk about things like Gisela said, centering things that were at the margin, we want to see those connections across other things. So American studies, like the methodology, the interdisciplinarily rigorous American studies list that we have, and things like that. So I see it as a fit through many dimensions of our catalog, and of course, most robustly, the historically strong Latinx and Latin American studies list. Hope that's a satisfying answer.
Yeah, and we have tons of more questions coming in, but we're kind of reaching to the end of time. So I think this really begs the question, if y'all will join us again for another session, maybe next semester or sometime down the line. I think this is some much needed information, particularly for folks who are publishing in these underrepresented fields and who want to publish in academic and independent presses. I think we just, we all are thirsting for that knowledge and that guidance of how to maneuver through these institutions and these presses. So we want to thank you all so much. Thank you, Dawn, Gisela, Beatriz. Thank you, PRSA and LASA PR for coming together to do this work. We're so excited for this kind of new turn in Puerto Rican studies, where we're collaborating across organizations, collaborating across all kinds of intersecting identities and areas of interest, and really looking towards like this new era of Puerto Rican studies that's like transdisciplinary and feminist and radical and abolitionist and all these things. So thank you so much. This is going to be recorded. We're going to post this and share this. And if anyone has any final words, it's all good. But thanks, we're out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.